I saw the detail of the painting from the young artist, and I was really struck by the idealism and the naivete. The painting starts off with a young African-American boy being drawn by a Caucasian boy, and he's drawing this portrait of the African-American boy with chalk on a barrel. And then friends surround them, and then what appears as sort of like a motherly or grandmotherly figure is off in the corner of the composition, and she's sort of eyeing the scene as it unfolds. What's so great about exhibiting at the Orlando Museum of Art is the ability to create a site-specific installation here in the gallery that references a detail of a painting from 1840 that's about a 60-second walk away. It's my hope that the viewers think of the space between the painting and the permanent collection and the LED lights installation as very much not only in conversation, but that walk to and from the painting is part of the work.
I consider my drawings paintings. They're dry pigment paintings rather than drawings. The way I think about drawing is about exploration, about a doubt, about mistakes. In this case, there are no mistakes. It's a very controlled process. I have a clear idea when the drawing ends and how does it start. Having full control of the image, which is the most important aspect. As I've been working with charcoal, it has become more of a medium where the process itself has been allowing different narratives into the work. So I've been smudging more, I've been increasing the scale, so making them more painterly in so many aspects, but also being more free with the way I'm handling the charcoal and the erasers. I think people always confuse them as large-scale photographs, and I think there's some truth because they have a photographic reference, but hopefully when they come near the work, they often find my hand in the surface of the drawing, which is something that I'm very interested in the labor part of making the work.
It's very important for me to build a space where we can think about other things besides ourselves. Whether you are in a temple in Egypt or you are along the coast of the Amalfi, there is certain patterns in humanity that I think that we all yearn for. In these spaces that I build, I try to find a cross-section where we can find a bond. I think far too often we are looking at things that divide us in humanity instead of finding what makes us more beautiful. In this particular space, though you see geometrical lines that are going in every direction and forms, it's really a language that I've created and redefined that I've been building over the past decade that really unites us, that moves from one place to another and finds our intersections. And these intersections can be as nuanced as a curve or as a turn or as a circle or as light emanating, but put together it becomes something so much more powerful, so much more beautiful. And I think that the impact is really left not while you're here, but after, and what kind of impact that you can take into the world after you've been in this space. It's very similar to the abstract expressionists in the 60s that are creating this force field on canvas. Instead, you're walking into the canvas, becoming a part of the piece, and taking that memory and leaving with it, and doing something very special with humanity.
First, there's these triggers, this enthusiastic energy. There's an idea that I must create and execute, and then the answers start coming. It's great when I attempt or others attempt to put words in our work, but my experience is a visual one, a highly visual one, and I believe on it. With this piece in particular that I have been documenting and archiving almost every object that I have lived with for the last perhaps 15, 20 years. It's based on the theory that objects are embedded with memory, and it is the artist's role to activate them or shake them to bring them alive or to release this memory. When I was a teenager, I volunteered for crystal surrounded islands. It was the first time really that I saw physically that you could do artworks of that magnitude, and it happens to be the color pink. The pelican continues to be a recurring theme on my work. The female pelican bird feeds their young until she bleeds, so it's associated with motherhood. There's something that have helped me find my own voice, and it's something that Keith Haring once said, which is the primitive will always make us new. You can always go to your roots and find something new. You can always go to your heritage, to your truth, and bring something new. So I'm not doing anything more than really honoring where I come from.
So a lot of the materials that I'm drawn to have this history and apparent use. And what happens a lot when I gather these materials and I bring them together is there's this period of play. I'm kind of asking them what they want to do and, you know, trying to get them to do something that they might not normally want to do. Like a lamp, for instance, you know, they sit on a table and it's like, well, how about if you lay down and you lay on top of each other? Or what if you were to hang upside down? Like, how would you feel about that? And then they said, no, we don't like that. And it's like, okay, well, let's try something else. So a lot of times it's like, well, when do I decide if something's ready or finished? Because part of it is just the constraints that you have normally, which might include time, space, and materials. And then, so it might be that glass jar that has my grandma's dentures in it that finishes a piece. It might be the cushion, the pillow, and that's kind of why a lot of times when I install shows, I'll just bring like a lot of material, a lot of different kinds of things. A lot of times I try to limit myself with certain constraints, and so that might be like only objects that I find in a certain space in a certain time, and then that kind of determines where it goes.
I use diverse materials of all forms, various media. A lot of times the ideas lead me to choose various technologies of the moment, various ways of expressing an idea that I think is the most fulfilling way to get the concept across. The reason that I've chosen the 60s VW bus is there's a really interesting culture that's developed around the VW bus. I recognize that the bus is iconic and has a certain representation in culture. It represents alternative culture to some people. To other people, it represents the idea of nomadism, the ability to leave and move to various locales. But also it relates to me personally. My father was a professional drag racer, so I kind of have always really been interested in the idea of the cultures that develop around automobiles, the aesthetics and the combination of aesthetics and mechanics that people assemble together in order to represent themselves and the way they believe about the world. When I go to various events related to the bus culture, I see a really amazingly diverse set of people who are not politically compatible, and yet they still come together and they coalesce around their love of this object of desire called the VW bus.
The history of objects is somehow fascinating for me because an object sculpturally, when it's modified or it's created or it's designed and produced, it sort of tells you where it comes from and how it's been made. I make objects that are materials that come from already made objects. I try to sort of think about what's the clues or the moments in the production of a sculpture or a collage that sort of allows a viewer to penetrate and understand how things were made and to have a much more complex visual and physical relationship to that object. If a chair is uncomfortable, no one's gonna sit in it. So the chair has to be complex, physically complex enough for someone to understand that it's allowed to be sit on and it will be comfortable for a long time. So I think sculpture has that kind of relationship to the body, because it's about walking through, around, in and out, and it's important always for me to be mindful of that, and not only how sculpture relates to itself and to its history, how it's been made, but how it relates to the space and how it creates spatial syntax around a room, and how, you know, a viewer is placed within that syntax and it's able to understand what object came first, what object came after, or not, or just get lost in this sort of visual relationship.
In terms of the work that's here in this installation, I've been rededicating myself to this notion of, from far away, it looks like something that you need to get closer to be able to understand. And I think that that is my way of addressing the ism, sexism or racism or ableism or nationalism, whatever structure has been put into place and has developed over the centuries now to keep us in our respective boxes or areas. I want us all to look closer at it, because it looks like a beguiling pattern at first. But then when on closer inspection, you realize it's telling you another story. The other part of using a lot of little things to kind of create a pattern or a texture is that I feel like we each believe in the ism at least a little bit, and that's all it takes. I know for myself, it takes a lot of effort to not believe even a little bit all the things that are marketed about Black people or women. You know, we think we are so clear on all these designations. We think we have it together, but it's like we also thought that the world was flat. Believing that with confidence and surety that the earth was a certain way drives me to this turning of the wheel, the roundness of the globe, the enclosure that has a roundness to it, you know, this kind of womb-like, planet-like, wheel-like experience. As soon as we think we have something tied down, it's gonna roll over into something else. And so I think I'm hopeful that this experience of the installation communicates that on some level.
When I was working in Cuba, I was learning and processing elements and issues that became from my environment. I processed the Russian, the Chinese, the Korean political propaganda made by people on the street into my art, and then I studied the process of information and manipulation of ideas, of philosophy that those autocracies establish to communicate their ideas and to spread their power over the population. My work is very connected to the history of my life. My father and my mother, both of them were artists. Both of them were censored in Cuba, were punished in Cuba by the establishment, and I learned how they survived. So I was experimenting myself the history of this socio-political process, where this was called revolution. I was kind of experimenting the same process that my family has with censorship, with how to express freely as an artist.
I was realizing as I was making this work that my experience of nature is often really specifically like through media. I always thought of nature as something that I had to go to. It was something that was always far away and distant. And I feel like the images that I saw, the video that I saw growing up, and the sense that I was always separate from it and apart from it was very fundamentally shaping to the way that I perceive my relationship to nature. And I don't think my experience with nature is unique, I think that becomes more and more of the general population's experience with nature as something maybe separate and distant that is maybe begins to only be understood, or only the experience is only through media. And so in making this work, I'm thinking about that relationship to nature really specifically, and asking these kinds of questions of the viewer, and hopefully they will be considering their own relationship and how maybe images or how media has affected their relationship to the natural world as well. I'm thinking about, what do we think of when we think of as Eden? What are these worlds that we want to live in, or what kind of worlds do we want to make for ourselves? I think that same kind of desire that so many people have had to create their own kind of utopian communities, and to not be satisfied with the way that society is structured now, about how to exist in the world, about how to relate to each other and to the natural world, seems like a really important question at this point in our society.